Greetings, Opera Avengers! This is your host, Alejandra Martinez, and today we have something a little different to share with you. Today, we are going behind the scenes here at the Great Lakes Light Opera to get to know one of our artists, Reed Taylor. Thank you for joining me, Reed.
Thank you for having me, Alejandra.
Now, before joining us with the Great Lakes Light Opera, Reed came to us with quite an impressive musical background. He has a degree in vocal performance from the Cleveland Institute of Music, dual degrees in foreign languages in German and French literature, and with a minor in Italian from Case Western Reserve University. He has served as the assistant to the conductor of the Pittsburgh Opera, was the staff accompanist at the Tyrolean Opera Program, and is currently serving as the East Shore Methodist Church music director. Reed, where on earth do you find the time?
Well, I think working with the excellent colleagues that I've had the pleasure of working with and the great music that I've been blessed to have the opportunity to work on, I really derive a lot of energy through the rehearsal process and performances, and that always propels me to the next project. I've always really loved music and languages because I really love people, and I love spending time with people and communicating with people on various levels. And I think naturally, music, which I consider to be a sort of language in and of itself, and the many languages of modern languages that I've studied have brought me closer to achieving the goals that I want to as a person.
Well, it's clear that your love of languages has certainly brought you to a wonderful and interesting place. What brought you to classical music in particular?
That's a really difficult question for me to answer because I honestly don't really remember. I was very young when I fell in love with classical music in particular. I've always listened to every genre of music. The great American composer Carlisle Floyd once said to me that he hated the plurality of when people use the term musics, as if there are different musics, when in reality there is one sort of music. And I think the goals of every genre of music are very similar, if not the same. But the classical music in particular, opera, it lends itself to, I think, uh, I guess, a higher octane sort of accessibility to human emotions, which describe what it's like to be human, and it also classical music tends to reflect a lot of the sort of philosophical questions that I'm very interested in as well. Not that other genres of music don't do that. I was also always very interested in European culture in particular, and I think my interest in European languages really latched on into that particular genre of music. But I grew up in a household where we listened to a lot of classical music. My aunt was a concert pianist, actually my great aunt, who in essence sort of discovered my musical abilities. I was about 3, and she had written me a song. I was really into the American holiday Halloween, and she wrote me a song about Halloween. She played it at the piano and sang it to me, and according to her, I was able to sing it back to her from memory perfectly after hearing it once. She told my mother, and my mother didn't really believe her, and it wasn't until 2 years later that I was enrolled in my first piano lessons. And later down the road, it was discovered that I had a talent as a singer, and I was a boy soprano um, for a few years until I had the experience of having my voice change actually in the middle of an audition. It began. And I've also had a keen interest, I think, in composing and conducting since my early teens. Um, I really, I'm really interested in all of the aspects that go into creating music and performing it.
Sounds like you had a lot of great opportunities. I love what you were talking about, music versus musics. I happen to know that there's some contemporary music that you're a big fan of. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I really love the music of Sade, in particular. I think that her voice really moves me, the timbre of her voice, and I think a lot of the context of her music, um, it just really resonates with my spirit, and I love listening to her recordings, especially from the uh, the late '80s and the early '90s when she was becoming an international phenomenon. Because I also like that sort of that style that was prevalent in a lot of pop music back then. But whenever I'm, you know, preparing for a concert or something in a moment of stress, I love to listen to her recordings. It really puts me in a good place.
Now, Reed, you are currently in production for two works being performed by the Great Lakes Light Opera, one of which being the children's opera Alice in Operaland, and the other being Manuel de Falla's one-act La Vida Breve. For both of these operas, you are music directing. Can you tell us what exactly is a music director and what do they do?
Well, that's a really wonderful question, and I think a lot of music directors sometimes have difficulty answering that because there are a lot of different sort of types of music directors, and there are a lot of different things that a music director can be in charge of. To me, the music director is someone who does their utmost to allow the performers to perform in a way that is the most conducive to them to give their finest performance. And that means preparation, rehearsal, knowing how to rehearse in an organized fashion as to not waste anyone's time, um, appealing to the many problems that can arise in the execution of difficult scores to allow the process to be uh, as to flow as smooth as possible for the performing artists so that they can uh, produce their craft at their highest level. Um, as Effa mentioned, I said that there are different sort of music directors. Some directors like to yell a lot. Some really are sort of picture themselves as sort of teachers, and they tend to talk a lot on the podium, for instance. Um, and some are blessed with a really amazing musical technique that when they're on the podium as a conductor, they don't really have to say anything at all. They're able to express all of their ideology towards the score within their baton technique.
Now, are music directors and conductors are they usually one and the same, or can they be
Yeah.
different? What differentiates a music director from a conductor?
Well, I think the music director and the conductor are very often the same person. I think it's sort of rare that you would have sort of a different person playing each role separately. Um, I think that if for some reason a conductor at a repertory theater, there might be an instance where one conductor is conducting maybe 4 productions of The Marriage of Figaro and then has to hand it off to someone else. But I think that's a very rare occasion. Sometimes also if there isn't a conductor and somebody is, just accompanying, as in the case of our production of Alice, then one has to communicate all of the musical ideology of the score without relying on baton technique, obviously, because one will be at the piano, and so most of what goes on in that sort of role happens in the rehearsal process.
Reed, you had the opportunity to work with many amazing conductors in your lifetime. Who would you say is your favorite conductor?
Oh, that's an excellent question, Alejandra. It's really difficult to choose one because there have just been so many in history that I really admire and currently today. A lot of the first interpretations I heard growing up were conducted by the then music director of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, Maris Janssens. And so he's always had a special place for me because he introduced me to a lot of my favorite pieces. I also really admire the great Laura Mizell, who passed away last year, because of his proficiency with stick technique, his wide-ranging knowledge of everything from music to philosophy to chess. I also really admire the craftsmanship of Maestro James Levine, but there are too many to really just choose one. In history, I really admire the recordings of Carlos Kleiber. I'm also a fan of the Italian conductor, particularly for opera, Victor de Sabaton.
Dolezzava la terra, stride all'uscio dell'orto, e un passo sfiorava l'arena. Entrava ella fragrante, sempre il sogno mio d'amore, l'ora è fuggita e muoio disperato, e muoio disperato.
That's a really incredible recording. You do a lot of conducting yourself, obviously, not least for the Great Lakes Light Opera. What goes through your mind when you're up there in the middle of a performance waving your baton?
Well, Alejandra, there are a few things in life that are more exhilarating. To be standing on a podium in front of your colleagues and having your sort of intuitive musical feelings run through your body into their and influence their playing. I think it was Lucas Foss, the great American composer, pianist, conductor, that said that that conducting is the closest thing to human telepathy that we can achieve. And there's really nothing more exhilarating than that. It's really incredible.
Let's talk a little bit about our production coming up in the Italian Garden on MLK this coming Sunday, Manuel de Falla's La Vida Breve. Now, La Vida Breve, it doesn't have a terribly complex plot that we're working with here. Mainly deals with two people, the young lady Salud and her lover Paco, and they have been enjoying many, many months of beautiful relationship, if you could call it that. But as it turns out, in this little one-act opera, Salud discovers that she is in fact Paco's other woman. And she discovers that actually by coming across his marriage to another young woman who actually is more wealthy and more beautiful. And it's this whole devastating thing for Salud. And the setting is all in Granada, Spain. And so emotions are running high. And I think emotions run high in the music as well. Don't you think, Reed?
Absolutely. This is one of the most captivating scores, and it's very, very special to the history of opera because it represents really one of the most famous Spanish operas. Spain hasn't had quite as, I guess, luminous of an operatic tradition as Italy. Or any of the other mainland European countries. I asked a Spanish colleague about this once, and he said that it was really because of the affinity for spoken word in Spain that opera in Spain never really took off quite like it did elsewhere. Of course, you also have the zarzuela tradition, which is a really magnificent and fruitful tradition of musical Spanish theatrical works. It's also really special because it is a really it's a paradigm of the Verismo tradition, the Italian Verismo tradition. Around this time in history, there were a lot of great one-act operas being written, and this was very similar to those, and that would include I Pagliacci and I Cavalleria Rusticani. Also, Rachmaninoff in Russia wrote a wonderful one-act opera called Aleko. This opera by de Falla was actually written about 10 years after Leoncavallo and Mascagni wrote the Cavalleria and Pagliacci operas, which have become so famous. And I think that de Falla's score really represents a lot of the realistic ideology of those Italian counterparts. But at the same time, it's so inherently Spanish, with so many wonderful Spanish rhythms and instruments, the usage of instruments. We have a guitar, a classical guitar playing in the beginning of the second act, and there's a Spanish folk singer singing at Paco's wedding to Carmela. It's really a gem, and it's been a pleasure to be able to put this opera on.
I know how you feel. It's really been a real pleasure working on La Vida Breve and working on it with you. Thinking ahead to the audience coming up this Sunday, I mean, you have had control over the musical output from the very beginning and the rehearsals and everything. Ultimately, from a musical standpoint, what do you want the audiences to go away with this weekend? What are you hoping to give them to sort of think about, I guess, to continue their work week and the rest of their lives after seeing La Vida Breve?
Well, La Vida Breve ends on sort of a low note because the leading gal dies. I don't want the audience leaving being profoundly saddened by that. What I would like is for them to feel invigorated by our performance of these wonderful Spanish pieces, and I hope that they come away saying, wow, I really love the music of Manuel de Falla, and I really enjoyed going to this opera, and I hope that they go out and are hungry to learn more and hear more from this really brilliant composer.
I'm sure they will. Thank you so much for joining me, Reed. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Alejandra. It's been my pleasure as well.
For all of you listeners in the Cleveland area to the Opera Avengers, we hope to see you this weekend, August 2nd, Sunday, in the Cultural Gardens off of MLK. We're going to be performing Alice in Operaland at 5:15 in the St. Casimir Meadow, and we're going to be playing La Vida Breve at 7:45 in the Italian Garden. If you want to learn more about the Great Lakes Light Opera, please visit us at www.greatlakeslightopera.com. Want to reach out? Want to say hi? Shoot us an email at greatlakeslightopera1@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Alejandra Martinez, and this has been Opera Avengers.